Good day, YouTubers. As part 6 of my review of Ontario Northland models that have been manufactured in HO, I'd like to talk about lifelike freight cars and cabooses brought to market prior to the launch of the Proto 1000 and 2000 product lines. Now, if you're interested in learning more about lifelike diesel locomotives, please see my previous video where I talked about lifelike's F7 and GP38 locomotives. In this video, we're just going to be talking about freight cars. Now, I found any information with these Ontario Northland models very hard to come by, and I've only been able to string a few things together. I know that Lifelike added the 40-foot boxcar to their lineup with the purchase of molds off a company called Varney in the late 1960s, and continued producing this car right up until somewhere around 1999, maybe even beyond. These were very generic 40-foot steel boxcars, and while the details and door hardware are a little chunky, they are not too bad considering how early this mold was produced. I've got multiple cars here of the progressive scheme, car number 90073, so showing you in a little more detail. In regards to the door hardware, you can see what I was talking about here. Not only is it a bit on the chunky side, it's also hasn't been painted. Just the black piece of plastic that holds the door in place has been installed after the rest of the car was painted. And the rest of the detail treatment, the ladders and such, they're all rather bulky and thick by today's standards. Now, I assume that the Chevron Blue model, the Chevron Blue boxcar here, was produced about 10 or even 20 years after the original progressive scheme boxcar. And it wasn't until I compared them side by side that I clued into the fact that they are in fact the exact same mold. It seems like some of the detail is getting degraded on the newer model, but what is most striking is the incredibly glossy blue paint. I suggest that the matte paint used on the earlier model is much superior to what they started using on their later products. The thickness of the paint also seems suspect. I've wondered if this might be a repaint of another model that maybe didn't sell particularly well, or that they were not able to bring to market for one reason or another. So just to show you here in a little more detail, see what I was talking about. The glossiness of the paint and plastic is just horrific. And the chunky end details and such are all the same as the previous car, but it looks to me like it's not capturing the detail quite as well as the car that I had just showed you. Now, the 9000 series road number on these cars, that is correct for a Ontario Northland 40-foot boxcar, as built anyway. The details are far from correct, and I'll get into that more on later videos, like the style of the end, the style of the door. It wasn't until True Line Trains released their 40-foot boxcar model that we had a more accurate representation of what these boxcars actually look like. I'll get into some of the details of that on a later date, but you can see there it's quite obvious as well that the scale of the older lifelike cars is off a bit as compared to the newer offerings. Now back to the blue car here. I cannot find any evidence of Ontario Northland repainting any of their standard unrebuilt 90,000 series boxcars. They only painted into the new Chevron Blue scheme their rebuilt cars, from what I can tell, and about the closest model that I've been able to find that captures that is this Athearn 40-foot boxcar. Again, some of the details here are not great, but it's the closest it's been captured so far, and this represents a 91,000 number series. before I move on, one other thing I wish to point out, just because I think it's rather interesting, is note the car number 90710. There appears to have been a borrowing of printing molds, as the same road number has been used for other 40-foot Ontario Northland boxcars across multiple manufacturers. So I've always found that rather frustrating as someone trying to collect Ontario Northland boxcars, as no matter who made the Chevron blue boxcar, it seemed to have the same road number. But again, I'll break some of that down in a little more detail in a future video. Now on to the 40-foot gondolas. So this is a lifelike 40-foot gondola. The blue paint is not quite as glossy as the car that I just showed you, but it's still definitely a bit on the glossy side. I'll bring it a little closer to the camera there, and you can see what I'm talking about. So same level of detail and such isn't great, but you know, these were made over a very long production period as well, so I suppose I should say that it was not too bad for when it was introduced. Now, I believe that Lifelike also produced a 40-foot gondola like this in the green chevron paint scheme, as can be seen in the boxcar behind it. But I've not been able to find any photos or anything up on eBay or such as of yet. My only hint of this is something that I observed in a YouTube video, and for all I know, it could have been a custom paint job. So if anyone out there knows or can confirm for me, please don't hesitate to reach out. Now, Ontario Northland did not have any 40-foot gondolas, so it wasn't until Lifelike started producing their Proto 2000 gondolas in the early 2000s that Ontario Northland modelers had something more accurate available to them. Now next, moving on to the open hopper. Now again here, we've got that same terrible glossy finish on the car, whether it's the paint or the plastic or a combination of both. Now the 6000 number series is correct at least, but that's probably about it. From what I can tell, Ontario Northland never repainted any of their 100-ton gondolas out of the progressive scheme. And just for a comparison here, I'll put a Trueline Trains 100-ton gondola on the track. You can also tell here that there's deficiencies in scale as well with the Lifelike model. Definitely too large and bulky as compared to the more accurately scaled, more recent offering. Again, these cars were produced over a long period of time, and I have not been able to confirm exactly when these were offered to the Canadian market. Finally, taking a look at the Ontario Northland Caboose. Again, a model that was produced by Lifelike over a very long period of time. Again, this is another mold that was produced by Varney and purchased by Lifelike, or taken over by Lifelike, somewhere around 1950. I should say the mold was made about 1950. It was in the 1960s that Lifelike took over some of the Varney molds. And it appeared in the Lifelike catalogs right up to 1999 and perhaps even beyond that. Now, Ontario Northland did not have any center copula cabooses that looked anything like the style of caboose, so it is definitely a creative liberty. And similar to the other cars, same somewhat terrible glossy paint treatment. And I know that some of you love seeing packaging. I don't have much in the way of packaging for these Lifelike items, but here is the box that the Caboose would have been delivered in. Sorry, I've got that a little too close to frame there, but I believe this is the packaging that was used throughout much of the 1980s and 1990s. So thanks for joining me for yet another video, and I hope to have another one up sometime very soon. Thank you again.